Welcome to Householders, a conversation about American life as Zen practice. I'm Inga Annie Tudora.
And I'm Kyosaku John Mitchell, and we're lay members of the Atlanta Soto Zen Center.
Did I tell you that I was writing a short film?
I don't remember. Before?
Well,
you mean before
I can't
we...
remember what I said in the past couple of months. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's weird. And someone would be like, you said that already. I'm like, I'm not one of those people, but those past few months I am one of those people. So.
I certainly don't blame you.
Yeah, I had this short film idea, and it was and maybe I did talk again, I don't remember, but it was somewhat inspired by my dad, but I'd come up with the idea before I knew he was sick and was dying. So then I kind of had to I still wanted to write it, but I guess I needed a little bit of time from that situation because I mean, I think that it had some, it's critical. I mean, not of him in particular, but it's like, okay, of our parents' generations, and particularly, probably not even your parents, but like evangelical Christian parents. But it's not so religious focused that it couldn't just be, someone who wasn't. It's about how certain people, and maybe even most of us nowadays, are very susceptible to fake news and conspiracy theories and that sort of thing. So the main character is a 65-year-old man who just started to retire, but he's also got some health issues, and being suddenly alone, isolated from people, he starts to kind of delve deeper into, the internet rabbit holes, and that is how I'm gonna pitch it. But I finished writing it finally, and I think it still has. I think the character still has a lot of elements that's like my dad, but I wanted to keep the compassion in there. I'm not just criticizing him and being like, what an idiot, That's like it's mean. And I think that if we put ourselves into the generation, the baby boomer generation, and some of the ways they grew up, like, we might have been the same way. I don't know. It's hard to say. We're not the younger generations are going to start saying stuff about us sooner or later. or they already are, but it's just that the message that I want to give from the film is to not push your parents or even your grandparents, because I know now, like, the younger generation, like Gen Z, it's their grandparents who are the baby boomers, but to not push them away just because they're like that. But because the only thing that prevents them from going deeper and deeper, and anybody down these rabbit holes, is community and, relationships and stuff.
Yeah, nice.
So again, it wasn't exactly like my dad. I mean, in the end, he had us all there with him, so it wasn't like he was so devoid of like community or something like that. But to a certain degree, yeah, he was still he had some interesting ideas that were hard for me to relate to, to say the least.
Are you saying you just finished this? Like you started working on it again?
Well, I wrote it. I just wrote it.
The whole thing since.
Yeah. I mean, it's a short film, so it was probably like 9 pages long or something like that.
Wow.
But it took me a long time.
Yeah. But like, you had this idea for a long time. And so then this whole experience clearly changed how it came out. Did it change the character in a way that you can describe? Well,
I think so. It's just because like when I think about my dad now and I think about those last days and like how vulnerable he was, it does give me even more compassion for that character.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, it's like it's not like a character I'm only trying to be critical of, but just a character that like it's like, oh, I want to understand this character, you know. And there is a, you know, there's a daughter character in it too. And yeah, I mean, I think that the struggle is that I don't want it to be like so much like my dad that people like pick up the wrong message from it or something like that, because he is like, you know, weirder than my dad, you know. He is a little you know, further down the rabbit hole, I should say. But right. I still, yeah, it really made me think of some ways too, about how powerful the brain is and how easy it can convince you of things. And this is different, you know. So for one thing in the film, he kind of refuses to take medication. Because he thinks it's going to be bad for him, which is something my dad did, but not in the same way, because I actually didn't disagree with what my dad did, because he was so far down, you know, he was so far down the cancer trail that I don't think medicine really would have done much, and maybe it would have been a waste of time or you know, more painful than what it's worth. So again, like I don't want people to see this movie and be like, wow, you really thought that you're really critical of how your dad dealt with his cancer. And I'm not, because I mean, maybe he would have done it if he was if it was an earlier stage, and maybe I probably would have disagreed with him then. But where he was, I didn't disagree with him. You know, it was his choice, and it was a valid choice to make. But generally, I don't agree with people who have a good fighting chance and don't take it. And so that's kind of where my character is.
Yeah. Right. It's like inevitable that certain kinds of details or situations would come through, but it really does sound like a kind of a different story.
Yeah, it's definitely a different story, but my feelings towards my dad are in there.
Yeah, right.
But not necessarily that this character is exactly like my dad. It's not.
Yeah. Something interesting about you having done this project since last we spoke, that you got into a little bit last time too, was that creativity, and the first time back too. Creativity seems to be a way of processing for you in a big way. I mean, like, I know it's just part of your life and that's just sort of how you live, but it also seems to me like it came back online really quickly for you, like relative maybe to other stuff.
Yeah, and I had really been wanting to do creative stuff for a long time, and you know, with the situation of my dad being sick, like I didn't have the energy to do that. Didn't have the emotional energy to do it. So it was always this like back of my head, you're gonna have to do this eventually. You're going to. And so eventually, when I found the energy to do it, I did. But it was really important to me. You're right, from like a processing perspective, but also it's like therapy almost. You know, we had talked about before how like creative mediums can put you in the flow, but it's probably different from meditation. But I do tend to think that like art is a type of therapy for me. I mean, to me, it's not really like a type of meditation. But I mean, maybe it's a type of meditation, but it's not Zen meditation.
Right. And like, is Zen a type of therapy? You know, like these categories are all very blurry, right? Yeah.
Right. So they're all kind of in the same area, but they're not the same.
Yeah.
You know, and I recognize that, but they're all like important to me. So I'm just realizing that because I spent a lot of time and energy working, I wanted to get good at my career and really try to work for the first time. Because if you remember, this is actually my first, full-time like paid job in probably 8 years. So it is a big deal, and I spent a lot of energy focusing on that, but it made me depressed because I really didn't have enough time to do creative things. And that's really what makes me feel good. I feel alive, feel like I'm doing something important. And I don't know how important it actually is, but it is important to me. Like, I don't know how many lives I'm changing by making like a painting or, a short film, but it at least like is important to me.
Well, and you're showing up differently in the world because you're doing it, right? Like,
true.
That's
absolutely.
one of the things that I always realize about myself whenever I've done some big project. If I ever feel like, oh, it's over, like, there's a sort of depression that can set in if like you make a thing and it doesn't like change your life, like it doesn't like blow everybody away and become like your full-time job, or whatever ridiculous fantasy one might have about it. But like, then there comes a point like 2 weeks later, inevitably, where I realize that I'm thinking differently, or I'm like in touch with some new part of myself that came out, or like I developed a new skill, that all came from the project, and I can draw a straight line to like what I did in that work that changed who I am. And then like that changes everybody around me too, and so like I end up feeling really grateful to the creative process at that point.
Absolutely. So I mean, how do you feel about using creativity as sort of a type of therapy?
I think that's maybe the only way I've ever used it. Like I don't have writing is the sort of the one thing that I feel like I have a gift for, in the way that I feel artists usually feel about their medium of choice. But even still, like, writing is such a broad, it's like weird to think of as a medium. It's not like painting, I feel like, because writing is, I mean, it's like painting in the same sense that like painting a house and painting a portrait are both painting, right?
Right.
And like I do the house painting kind of writing, and that is something that, I mean, I've turned it into work, and it is creative, and there's a way to engage the creative drive in me and have a job and get paid and do it every day. Right. So like I've accepted that kind of as one of my creative outlets. And I think it really has sort of diminished the amount of like pure creative writing I do, but not entirely. I'd still do some. But the therapeutic kind isn't something I've done for a very long time. I mean, I used to journal obsessively. I'm not sure if we've ever talked about this. I used to write like 10, 20 journal pages every day.
Wow.
Like in college.
That's impressive.
And well, I was like, also an introverted, like not like antisocial behavior. Like I was like living in my head at the time. Like I was not having as much fun as other people were. But I was And then I started having fun and stopped doing it, basically, is what happened. But that was a very important process for me. I worked through a lot of things, and I still have the journals, and they are still of extremely important, like, emotional support to me, like, just to sort of go back to those times. And I was pretty good about dating them too. So, like, I can find specific events or, like, see what was happening 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And like, I find that process really valuable. So, like, that's definitely the other extreme of, like, therapeutic creativity. But music has been in there all the while. And I did, like, spend a fair amount of time for a few years playing music, maybe a couple different times. There were 2.5 year periods where I was playing music, like, every day. And that had a social component to it also. You know, it was like a way of hanging out with people. And also there were sort of some social ambitions about it, like about having a cool band that, like, had a scene, like a world.
Yeah.
And I got to experience that I mean, it was a pretty small scale, but, like, I got to experience what that felt like a little bit. And that was also really healing. And maybe in a few cases, like, the art itself, the songs themselves were healing or therapeutic to create. But I still don't feel like honestly, it's kind of the exception that proves the rule in my life. Because I think back to the process of writing the 11 songs that really do feel that way to me and recording them and everything, like this whole year-long episode of making this music. And it is not, I mean, everybody probably feels this way about their first album, but, like, it doesn't feel fully realized to me. It doesn't feel like I completed the project, sort of like I dragged it across the finish line, and I didn't, like, do as good of a job as I wanted to, for one thing. But then more importantly, and that might be false, you know, that might just be sort of insecurity. But more importantly, it feels like a bolt from the blue. It felt like it just sort of fell into my brain and I had to do it. And that was a really flattering experience at the time that I, like, downloaded this project. But I can't do it again. You know, like, I haven't done it since then. It was 10 years ago. And, like, you know, that makes me feel constricted in my ability to process things that way, because it feels like it's not up to me. You know what I mean?
Oh, well, yeah, I think when you said that, like, oh, I've only done it in a therapeutic way, I was like, well, you know, I think it is true to a certain extent. Like, the most art I've made is when I have been, like, my sickest.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, I'm going through another cycle of feeling bad again. You know, hopefully it doesn't last that long, but it's been a month at least. So, but what I know is gonna heal my body is to take care of my mind. And again, we're talking about, like, there is actually scientific value to this, especially with lupus, because they're, like, related. Like, if you're stressed out, then you're gonna have more inflammation. It is just how it works. And so yeah, just that I don't do it on purpose, but it's just that's when I want to make the most artwork, for sure. Is just like, because if I don't have anything else, I have that. And, you know, you can't take that away from me, and that's comforting.
But is it something that you fall back on consciously, or is it something that starts happening when you start needing it? You know what I mean? Like, is it coming out spontaneously because of the situation?
It's so weird. It just seems like I put that energy out, and then like, also people want to collaborate with me at the exact time that I need them to as well.
When you say put the energy out, you mean, like, the desire to create something?
Yeah. Yeah, just the desire.
You send the signal, like, it's time to make stuff, and then, like, the conditions start falling into place. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's kind of what happened to me with this downloaded thing too. I was just in a situation where there was like nice guitars and tons of musicians all over the place. So like when I put that energy out there, and like a festival being planned, you know, so like the conditions were coincidentally such that when I put the energy out there, it was like, oh yeah, sure, here's a show, you know. So like I couldn't do that now in the same way. I mean, it's you're talking about collaborative stuff. Like you do some solo creative practices and some that then involve like making films takes tons of people.
Yeah, it does take tons of people. I have one of my good friends is someone I collaborate with a lot artistically. And we've made two other short films in our Alien series. But we also there's a documentary about the Zen Center that we made together too. So don't judge me too harshly on that one. It was an early project, okay? And I had a camera. I didn't even know how to use it. I didn't know how to use a DSLR. So it came out.
Yeah.
It worked eventually. It was not my best work, but the Zen Center appreciates it, and that still gets comments on YouTube. So I think it's like the most liked video. So but anyway, so I collaborate with him a lot. We made a comic book together too. So it was just before this all happened. He was like, I've got like a lot of film gear here. So when you're ready to make a movie, I'm like, okay, got to get writing. But it just took me a long time, and thankfully he's patient. So we're here now. I made it, and we just have to plan it all out now.
Yeah.
But I do think that a big part of that is actually collaborating with people. And I think that's before, when I was just painting by myself, even though I was doing creative stuff. And I have like a few portraits I did, and they were just for fun. So like none of them I was like really like, I'm going to sit here and make a work of art. But it didn't bring me as much joy. And I think that the collaborative nature of art is one that like brings me a lot more energy and healing to it, and more so now than it has in the past, because I used to be more of a perfectionist and I've let go of a lot of those tendencies, mainly because of work, because I feel like you really can't be a perfectionist at work, because usually don't have enough time to. But also like it's just not going to be pleasant for you if you do that. So, and then also I'm like collaborating constantly with people. I actually ended up liking it. I liked getting people's feedback. So when I was having this writer's block, and I went to Franklin, and I was like, you need to come sit down with me and write this out with me, because I can't do it on my own. And then we sat down together, and he threw my ideas at me, and I was like, oh, okay, no, I like these. So, his ideas are in the film, and I'm happier for it. But I wasn't willing to do that like a few years ago, so I've changed a little bit. I think the work's better for it, though.
Do you think of yourself as like a naturally cooperative, like I would say collaborative, but I'm talking about something lower down than that? Like, do you like to cooperate, or do you like to like either be in charge or do it yourself? Like generally speaking in projects.
Gosh, well, again, it's like this, I do like to be a little bit in charge.
Yeah.
But I am willing to cooperate with people more so than I used to. I've definitely softened up in that area, and again, I think that's the better move. But still, like now, I have a lot of ideas, and I really like get excited about them, and I want to see them come to fruition. So I want a little bit of control to make those like come true. But nowadays, I'm like, yes. Also, I'm gonna need your inputs on it, though. I'm not gonna just boop. Here it is. anymore because it's stressful.
Yeah.
To be that way. Well, what do you like?
Well, I think that I am pretty cooperative in general. Like I don't like to do things all by myself. And like this record that I mentioned is a good example because it was under my name. It was my songs. I wrote these songs.
Yeah.
And I was like not going to be able to make this record without other people. So what ended up being interesting about that project for me, and I do think this is reflected in other areas of my life, including work and other kinds of like lower down collaboration, even like household collaboration. I learned how to sublimate my creative desires, like the thing I wanted to see exist, into conversations rather than descriptions.
What?
Or something like that. I didn't go into producing a song and say, I want you to play this fast and I want you to like stop on the third beat of the next measure. You know, like I didn't like chart it out for everybody. I was like, here's the song. I play it by myself and I'd be like, I want to hear what you're thinking about for a beat for this song, you know? Mm-hmm. And then like, and I mean, it's hard to kind of recap it because it was like a long period of time and there were, you know, it was very particular. Like the thing I'm describing isn't even just these steps. It was like, I learned how to learn from the people I was collaborating with, how they like to work, and then give them the sort of permission to do their thing in the right places and times in such a way that they would create the piece of it that I needed in order to make it into something resembling what it was. And it was a really different process than telling them what to play would have been. But it was also much easier overall.
It is easier. You don't have to come up with every single thing.
Yeah, but instead I had to sort of manage it. Yeah. Which I was able to do, but the hard part then was kind of inhabiting the character of like the director, right? Like the person in charge of the production. And it took a sort of confidence that I didn't walk into the session with. You know, like I didn't know how it was going to feel for them to be like looking at me when they didn't know what to do, you know, or not having an opinion. You know, there would inevitably be a point like 6 hours into a day in the studio where people would just be like, I don't care what we do. Just like, you know, like it's not they weren't there on their own steam. They were like riding my wave. And so I had to be the one that was like pulling them out of those kinds of situations and making it fun again. And it even had like sort of funny, like very kind of material level. Like I made the coffee, I ordered more pizza. I did, you know, like I ended up doing the sort of morale things that needed to be done and giving, and those were like gifts, right? There was like, you know, like I was giving them something that was like firing them up to keep going. And I just sort of found the solutions to those problems like that. Like I didn't go in thinking like, oh shit, I better think about like, what are we going to have for lunch today in order to make this record happen? But I just realized that no one else was thinking about what we were going to have for lunch today. They didn't want to deal with lunch. They were there as a favor. And so like, you know, I had to solve that problem. I figured out how to do it. I guess this means I'm good at it, but I just like had never done that before. And certainly I made something that I wouldn't have been able to make otherwise. So I guess, yeah, I am a collaborator fundamentally. I mean, these podcasts that we've done for the Sangha, both of them, ones that I'm working on, are examples of this, right? Like the one with Sensei is different. I'm mostly just sort of executing his ideas that he would be unable to execute. But there is like a sort of, he leaves a lot of decision making up to me in terms of like, you know, production and editing because he doesn't know what the possibilities are. But like for this with you, like I like had a paragraph of things to say at the beginning. I was like, here's what I think we could do a podcast about. Right. But like, that was sort of all I brought in. And then like, it was up to you to buy into it. And then also like ever since then, you know,
no, I mean, that's interesting to, I mean, not to say that this is a good thing or a bad thing, but you know, for those who don't know, listeners out there, we just kind of come to the podcast and talk about our feelings. We used to write topics down to be like, we're specifically going to talk about this topic, but it actually turned out the natural conversations were much more heartfelt and interesting. So
yeah, we prepared up front big time at the beginning, and I think we found that like sometimes when we accidentally didn't, or when we just sort of wandered off into the weeds, those were the good ones. So we just like gave ourselves the permission to keep doing that.
They weren't always the good ones, but they were like at least 80% of the time they were the good ones.
Well, yeah, it was like the higher variability. Like there were some of them were the bad ones, and then others were the best ones. So it was worth the risk, right? But I mean, it's a really interesting example because this is an interesting format too. It's like two people talking, like, is pretty minimal as far as like a creative project goes, right? Compared to making a movie. But
we also collaborated on the artistic piece a little bit too. We had
that was a
ideas
really
we were
good
bouncing around. You had like these colors that you liked, and you know, I still love the painting.
Yeah, me too.
So
that was a good way to start.
A lot of times I make art and I'm like, this sucks. I don't ever want to look at this painting again.
Yeah.
But that one I still like. So
yeah, that was a great way to start because it was like a much more concrete piece of art than the thing we were going to put it on was.
Yeah.
But it gave form to it kind of also. And then also just sort of like the successful nature of it gave me like all of the rest of the confidence I needed that this was a good idea. Right.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, it feels like there's almost a message here somewhere, but like I think it's something about how like real life turns into art and art turns into real life. And there's no like firm like art making zone that you go off into to make art, and it's like optional in life, right? Like the stuff that happens to us flows into these ideas that need to be realized, and they need, and like often they need the collaboration of the people in our lives. Even if it's people who aren't working on the thing, it's like the people who give us the space we need in order to do the thing, like they're collaborators too. And I guess the healthy thing that we're expressing is that like we both have in our, I could use some more, to be perfectly honest, but I feel like you're doing a great job of like giving yourself the openings in what's really happening to you to allow the sort of crystallization of emotional artifacts of that experience to come through and like exist in the world outside of you. And that is kind of a way of not moving on from them, but like moving through them, getting through them. And you have to like open doors for yourself all the time in order to go through them when like there's something on the other side of it.
Householders is a production of the Atlanta Soto Zen Center in Atlanta, Georgia, and the Silent Thunder Order. Find us on the web at ASZC.org.
Our Sangha depends on your support. You can donate by PayPal to donate at storder.org. Gasho.